I still remember the day my uncle looked at my drawings and scoffed, his lips curling into that familiar, cruel smile and said, "You'll never be anything. A failure artist, that's all you'll ever be." His words hit me harder than I expected. I was 16, sitting cross-legged on the floor of his cramped living room, pencils scattered around me, my latest sketch of the old oak tree lying in front of him. I had spent hours on that piece, capturing every shadow, every twist of the branches, the light falling just right through the leaves. I thought he would at least glance at it and nod, maybe say something encouraging. But instead, he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head as if the room itself had disappointed him, and his eyes carried that judgmental, sharp glare that made my chest tighten. "Art isn't a real job," he said, his voice loud, almost theatrical, as if he wanted my cousins sitting on the sofa to hear it too. "You're wasting your time, people like you never succeed." I felt a small, hot knot of anger rise inside me, mixed with shame I didn't deserve. I wanted to tell him that the lines on the paper were not just ink and pencil, they were pieces of me, of my imagination, of the hours I spent trying to make the world beautiful in my own way. But I didn't. I swallowed the words. Instead, I quietly packed up my pencils, placing the sketch back into my worn portfolio and walked to my room. The silence of that afternoon settled over me like a heavy curtain, and for the first time I doubted myself. Could he be right? Was I really a failure? Over the next few years, his words haunted me. Every exhibition I applied to, every art class I took, every sketch I shared with a friend carried the weight of his judgment. He would not let a single family gathering go by without reminding me, or the entire room, of my wasted talent. "Why don't you focus on something real?" he would say over dinner, his fork tapping the plate like a metronome of mockery. "Art won't feed you, art won't get you anywhere." And every time, I forced a smile, pretending I didn't hear him, pretending his words did not sting. Deep down, though, they sank into my mind like cold stones, pressing me down, making me question if I had made a mistake believing in myself. I remember late nights sitting by my window, sketching quietly while the rest of the house slept, trying to drown out his voice in my head. My pencil moved over paper like a lifeline, and slowly, imperceptibly, I learned to trust the quiet strength inside me more than the loud condemnation outside. I applied to small art shows, sometimes hiding my real name, afraid he would find out and laugh in front of others. My work began to attract small attention, small praise, tiny whispers that perhaps I wasn't as invisible as he thought. And still, I never spoke of it in his presence. I wanted the moment to come on my own terms, not as a confrontation, but as undeniable proof of who I really was. Years passed. I worked hard, pouring my life into my sketches, paintings, and eventually sculptures. I studied techniques late into the night, watched tutorials, read books, attended workshops, and slowly built a body of work I was proud of, even if the world outside my small circle of supporters barely noticed. All the while, my uncle's voice remained a shadow over every achievement, reminding me I was wasting my life. When I received my first invitation to display my work at a small local gallery, I hesitated. Should I tell him? Should I hide it like I always did? I thought of his sharp smile, his raised eyebrows, the cruel, judgmental tone that would surely follow. I decided quietly not to invite him. I wanted to feel the joy of recognition without the sting of his words. And then, everything changed in the most unexpected way. A prestigious museum announced an upcoming exhibition of emerging artists, and my name was selected. I was overjoyed, trembling as I read the acceptance email, my hands shaking so badly I could barely click through the details. This was the moment every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every whispered doubt had been leading to. I wanted to scream, to run around the room, to share the news with everyone who had believed in me. And yet, before I could even celebrate, I received a phone call that made my stomach drop. "Before we can include your work," the museum's coordinator said politely, "we need written permission from your next of kin, your legal guardian, in this case, your uncle." The words felt like a punch. My uncle, the same man who had belittled me for years, now held the key to whether the museum would showcase my work. I felt my heart sink, my chest tight, and my fingers curl around the phone. For a moment, panic gripped me. He had the power to say no, to ruin years of effort with one dismissive signature. I remembered the afternoons he mocked my sketches, the dinners where he called my dreams worthless, the laughter of cousins echoing in the background as he ridiculed me. And yet, deep inside, a spark of determination flickered. I would not let him dictate the value of my life's work. I took a deep breath and dialed his number. "Hello," he said, his usual tone dripping with superiority. "What do you want?" "I need your signature," I said carefully. "The museum, they require permission to display my art. Legally, you are my guardian." There was silence on the line, then a scoffing laugh. You think your little scribbles deserve to be in a museum, don't make me laugh." My fingers tightened around the phone, but I forced myself to stay calm. It's not a request, I need your signature. Without it, my work can't be shown. And why should I? He spat. Why should I let everyone see how useless you are? I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the anger rise and fall. And then I said quietly, deliberately, because this isn't about me proving anything to you, it's about sharing my work with the world. And if you refuse, the world will never see it, not your opinion, not your judgment, nothing. But if you sign, you will witness something that even you cannot dismiss. He was silent for a long moment. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the faint tapping of his fingers against a desk somewhere. And finally, begrudgingly, he said, "Fine, I'll sign, but don't expect me to clap for you." I smiled softly, hanging up the phone. It wasn't victory yet, not truly. But the moment I held the signed form, I felt a strange calm wash over me, a quiet strength born from years of enduring cruelty, of persevering when nobody believed in me. And I knew, one day, the world would see my work, and perhaps, just perhaps, the one person who doubted me the most would finally realize that the measure of a person's worth is never in the approval of those who can't see their vision. The days after I sent the museum form to my uncle were some of the longest I had ever experienced. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, wondering if it was the museum, or worse, a call from him with more mockery and insults. I kept imagining him holding the pen, smirking, ready to deny me the chance I had worked so hard to earn. I replayed the moment in my mind when he had laughed at my request, the way his voice had carried that cruel certainty that I would fail, that nothing I did would ever matter. And yet, despite all the fear twisting inside me, I refused to let it show in my daily life. I went to the studio every morning, painting, sketching, working on the pieces I hoped would someday be displayed in that gallery. Each stroke of the brush was a quiet act of defiance, a reminder to myself that my worth was not measured by his cruelty, and that my passion had its own life beyond his opinions. My friends noticed a change in me during those weeks. I smiled more, moved with a quiet confidence, even though inside I was holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, one afternoon, the call came. It wasn't from the museum, it was from my uncle. My heart froze as I answered. "I've signed it," he said flatly, almost as if he was doing me a favor I didn't deserve. I blinked, speechless for a moment. "You signed it?" I managed to whisper. "Yes," he said. "You can go ahead, the museum can have your little drawings." His tone was still sharp, still dripping with the same arrogance, but there was a shift I hadn't expected, a hint of resignation. I thanked him politely, trying not to let my voice shake, and hung up. I remember leaning back in my chair, staring at the wall, and feeling the weight of years of doubt and judgment lift slightly, replaced by a strange mixture of relief and quiet triumph. That night, I told Daniel, my best friend who had always believed in me, what had happened. He grinned and hugged me tightly. "Finally," he said. "They'll see it, all of them." I nodded, though I couldn't help feeling nervous. This was only the beginning. The real test was still ahead. The moment when people who had dismissed my art, who had called me a failure, would actually stand in front of my work. Weeks passed, and the museum called to confirm the display dates. I remember walking into the gallery for the first time, my portfolio tucked under my arm, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The walls were pristine, the lighting perfect, and my pieces were arranged carefully in their assigned spaces. I felt a mixture of awe and disbelief. This was real, this was happening. And then the day of the exhibition arrived, and my uncle, unbeknownst to me, was invited to a private viewing because of his legal role in granting permission. I had no idea he would be there. I walked through the gallery, greeting a few fellow artists, trying to calm my nerves, and then I saw him, standing in the corner, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room like a man who didn't expect anything to impress him. The moment our eyes met, I felt a surge of emotion, fear, anticipation, and a quiet, steady determination all rolled into one. I walked toward him slowly, trying to appear calm, my chest tight but steady. He looked at me, his face unreadable, and then his gaze fell on the paintings I had created, the sketches, the small sculptures. I saw his eyebrows rise slightly, a twitch in the corner of his mouth, a flash of something I had never seen before, surprise. Not just surprise, but recognition. He stepped closer, and I watched as he traced the lines of one of my larger paintings with his eyes, his mouth opening slightly, no words coming. I waited, letting him take it in. And then finally he spoke, though his voice was lower, softer, almost hesitant. You did this." He sounded as if he were tasting a bitter pill, trying to accept it. "Yes," I said quietly. "I did." He nodded slowly, turning to glance at the gallery visitors, then back at my work. I didn't realize. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause that made my stomach twist with tension. Then, almost under his breath, he muttered, "You were right all along." His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a tiny crack in the arrogance, a glimpse of humility, a recognition of all the years he had spent mocking me without understanding me. I felt a strange wave of compassion toward him. I didn't want revenge, didn't want to gloat. I wanted him to see what I had built, to understand what patience, determination, and quiet strength could achieve, and maybe, just maybe, to feel a lesson in humility he had never learned before. He took a step back and gestured at the paintings. They're really good, he admitted, his voice low but sincere. My chest tightened with a mix of relief and satisfaction. I nodded gently. Thank you, I said softly. Took years of work, and yes, many people doubted me, but I never doubted myself. He looked down, silent for a moment, and then raised his gaze again, meeting mine with an expression I had never seen: respect. I underestimated you, he said. I was wrong to call you a failure. I smiled softly, letting the words settle. It's all right, I said. Everyone learns in their own time. Daniel, who had been watching from nearby, came over and hugged me. You did it, he whispered. You proved it. And in that moment, standing in the gallery, surrounded by my work, I felt a quiet triumph that was stronger than any applause. It wasn't about proving my uncle wrong anymore. It was about honoring myself, my years of effort, my patience, and my belief in my own voice. The exhibition opened to the public later that day, and people wandered past my paintings, stopping, admiring, taking pictures, and leaving notes of appreciation. I watched them quietly, feeling the warmth of recognition, the soft glow of validation, and the deep, steady peace that comes when you finally stand in the light you were always meant to reach. And all the while, my uncle stood nearby, silent, observing, his pride swallowed by the undeniable truth. His niece, whom he had called a failure for years, had created something remarkable. The days after the exhibition opened were a whirlwind of emotions, both for me and, surprisingly, for my uncle. I noticed small shifts in the way he looked at me, subtle changes that were impossible to miss. During the first few public viewings, he hovered near my work, quietly observing visitors' reactions, their admiration, the way people lingered in front of my paintings, taking in every brushstroke, every detail I had painstakingly crafted. I could see the disbelief flicker across his face as he realized that the world valued my talent far more than he ever had. At first, he didn't speak to me about it, not directly. Instead, he would make comments under his breath, muttered remarks when I wasn't close enough to hear fully, like a man trying to process a truth he wasn't ready to accept. I can't believe people actually like this, I overheard him say once to another guest, his voice low, almost reluctant. And yet he didn't leave. He stayed, observing, silently acknowledging a world he had once insisted would never recognize me. That weekend, the museum invited me to a small private dinner for the artists, curators, and a few donors. I arrived with Daniel by my side, heart pounding with both excitement and nervousness, because I knew my uncle had been invited in his capacity as my legal guardian on paper, and I wasn't sure how he would behave in front of others. When I entered the dining hall, I saw him already there, seated quietly at the far end of the table, his posture stiff, hands clasped together. For a moment our eyes met across the room, and I could see a war going on behind his gaze, a mix of pride, reluctance, and perhaps shame at the years he had mocked me. I approached cautiously. "Hello," I said softly, keeping my tone calm and steady. He nodded, his jaw tight. "Congratulations," he muttered, his voice rough, but it carried a hint of sincerity I hadn't heard before. I smiled gently, realizing that this small acknowledgement was a victory in itself. Throughout dinner, I noticed how he watched the interactions between the curators and visitors as they complimented my work, discussing its depth, the technique, the emotion behind each piece. His hands tightened around the silverware, his eyes darting nervously from one conversation to the next, until finally someone at the table asked him directly, "Your niece is very talented. Were you surprised?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. He cleared his throat, glanced at me, and for the first time I heard him speak words I had longed to hear, though not in the tone I had expected. "Yes," he said slowly. "I was wrong about her. I misjudged her. She has worked very hard, and she deserves this recognition." The table fell into polite silence for a moment, everyone processing his rare admission. I felt a warm, quiet ache inside me, not for revenge, not for victory over him, but for the years of struggle, the nights spent doubting, the moments I had felt invisible. This was the recognition I had sought, not from the world, but from someone who had meant so much in my life, whose opinion had once threatened to crush my confidence. After the dinner, we walked to the gallery for a private viewing of my displayed work. The museum staff had arranged the pieces carefully, and the lighting highlighted the textures and depth I had poured into each creation. Visitors moved slowly, quietly, reverently around the room, taking in the art, asking questions, leaving notes of appreciation. My uncle walked behind me, silent at first, his eyes scanning the walls as though seeing them for the very first time. And then he stopped in front of a large painting I had completed months ago, one that had taken weeks to perfect, capturing the sunset over the old oak tree where I had first learned to sketch. His hands twitched slightly as he leaned closer, studying the strokes, the colors, the way I had captured the light and shadow. He didn't speak at first, just stared, and I waited patiently, giving him the space to confront the truth he had long denied. Finally, he took a deep breath, his voice low and almost breaking. I didn't understand before. I thought you were wasting your life. I thought, he paused, swallowing hard, I thought you would fail. And yet here you are. Everyone sees what I refused to see. Your talent, your determination, it's remarkable. His words were not loud, but they carried a weight that I had never felt from him before. I reached out and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his body, the mixture of relief and humility. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. We walked through the gallery together, and I could sense the shift in him, the arrogance and cruelty slowly replaced by respect and a dawning understanding. By the end of the evening, I realized something important. The validation I had been waiting for, the acknowledgement I longed to receive, was not in the words of strangers, nor in the applause, nor even in the signed forms. It was in the moment when someone who doubted me the most finally saw the truth for themselves. My uncle didn't hug me, didn't clap, didn't even smile broadly. But his presence beside me, the honesty in his voice, the quiet respect in his gaze, it was more than enough. That night, as Daniel and I walked home under the city lights, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Every cruel word, every mocking comment, every moment of doubt and frustration had been part of the path that led to this quiet triumph. I had endured not to spite him, but to honor myself, to nurture the passion that had always been inside me, to trust in my own strength when others refused to. Weeks later, the exhibition closed, and the museum invited me to continue collaborating on future projects. The emails poured in offers from galleries, art enthusiasts, even other museums. And my uncle, he remained quietly in the background, never boasting, never acknowledging my success to anyone else, yet I could feel it in small ways, in the way he now complimented my work, in the way he asked about my projects, in the way he seemed genuinely curious instead of dismissive. And I realized then, in the calm, quiet moments after all the applause and recognition, that this story was about more than art. It was about resilience, about believing in yourself when everyone else doubts you, about letting your work speak louder than words, and about how even the hardest hearts can change when they are faced with undeniable truth. I finally understood that triumph is not just about proving others wrong. It is about proving to yourself that you are capable, that your efforts matter, and that patience, courage, and quiet persistence can turn even the harshest criticism into a source of strength and eventual understanding. The final moment came quietly, almost like a whisper, at the closing ceremony of the museum's exhibition. I had been invited to give a short talk about my work, my journey as an artist, and the inspiration behind the pieces on display. The room was filled with art lovers, curators, and fellow artists, all waiting to hear my story. I felt a flutter of nerves in my chest, but it was tempered by the years of preparation, the countless late nights spent hunting my craft, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing I had earned this moment through sheer dedication. And then, as I looked across the room, I saw him, my uncle, sitting near the back, arms crossed at first, as always, but his posture softened slightly, his eyes fixed on me, attentive in a way I had never seen before. For a moment, the memory of his cruel words surfaced, the endless criticisms, the scoffs, the laughter he had directed at my dreams. But now those words felt distant, like echoes of a past I had outgrown, because here I was, standing in front of a room of people who respected my talent, and yes, even someone who had doubted me most profoundly. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice steady, calm, and heartfelt. I spoke of the long journey, the nights of self-doubt, the small victories that kept me going, and the moments when others believed in me more than I believed in myself. I shared how each sketch, each painting had been more than just art. It had been a way to express the parts of me that had no voice, a way to claim a life that others had tried to define for me. As I spoke, I noticed my uncle shift in his seat. His usual arrogance seemed to soften, replaced by a quiet, almost hesitant attentiveness. I could see the weight of realization settling in him, the understanding that the person he had mocked, dismissed, and belittled had built something real, something meaningful, and that it had been within her all along. When I finished, the room erupted into applause, a wave of appreciation and respect that felt both overwhelming and deeply affirming. And as people stood, clapping, I saw him rise too, slowly, awkwardly, almost as if he had forgotten how to express pride. He walked to the front of the room and cleared his throat, his face a mixture of humility and astonishment. I was wrong, he said, his voice quieter than I expected, but each word carried the weight of years of denial and misunderstanding. All this time I doubted her, dismissed her, called her a failure. And now I see that I have been blind. My niece is not a failure. She is talented, dedicated, and remarkable. My chest tightened, not from triumph, not from revenge, but from the long-awaited acknowledgement, the honest recognition from someone who had once made me feel small. I stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm, feeling the tension in his body slowly release. "Thank you," I said softly, letting my calm confidence convey what words alone could not. He nodded, swallowing hard, and for the first time I saw a smile form, small, hesitant, but genuine. Audience watched in polite silence, sensing the significance of the moment, though they could not fully understand the years of struggle, the pain, or the quiet resilience that had led to this point. After the ceremony, as the gallery began to clear, he stayed behind, looking at my work again, this time without the shadow of judgment, only with curiosity and a growing sense of respect. I underestimated you," he said quietly, almost to himself, but I heard him. "I thought you would fail, and I see now. I was wrong, truly wrong," I smiled gently. "It's okay," I said. "I didn't create for approval or to prove anyone wrong. I created because I had to, because it was my way of living, my way of being." He looked at me, eyes glistening with something I had never expected from him, humility and perhaps even regret. "You've taught me something," he admitted softly. "That strength isn't loud. It doesn't need validation from others, it just exists quietly, and eventually it shows itself in ways we cannot ignore." I nodded, feeling a deep warmth bloom in my chest. It wasn't revenge, not anger, not victory over him. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that patience, dedication, and believing in myself had allowed the truth to shine through. The exhibition remained open for weeks, and as visitors continued to admire my work, I noticed my uncle visiting quietly from time to time, observing, sometimes asking questions, occasionally offering comments that were thoughtful and respectful. He never tried to take credit, never boasted, but his presence was different now. He had changed, not because I forced him, not because of pride or confrontation, but because he had witnessed the undeniable proof of what I could do, and it had reshaped the way he saw me. One evening, after the exhibition had closed for the day, he and I walked together to the entrance. The museum lights cast a gentle glow on the pavement, and the air was cool and soft. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, he spoke with quiet sincerity, without a trace of mockery. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Not just because of this exhibition, but because of who you are, your persistence, your courage, your belief in yourself when I did not. I have learned from you." I felt tears prick at my eyes, not of sadness, but of relief, of long-awaited understanding, of years of struggle finally meeting acknowledgement. "Thank you," I whispered, smiling. "That means more than anything." As we parted ways that evening, I realized something profound. The victory was never about proving my uncle wrong. It was about honoring my own journey, trusting in my own abilities, and letting my work, my passion, and my resilience speak louder than any criticism or insult. Life had taught me that people may doubt you, judge you, or even try to break you. But your determination, your love for what you do, and your belief in yourself are the forces that will carry you forward, that will create opportunities, and that will ultimately earn the respect of even the hardest critics. And as I walked home that night, city lights shimmering softly around me, I understood that the greatest triumph is not just the applause of others, but the quiet, steady knowledge that you never gave up, that you persevered, and that you remained true to yourself, no matter what anyone said.